United Launch Alliance is starting off the year in a big way. After a decade of development and testing, its Vulcan rocket made its big debut in the middle of the night with a payload bound for the moon. The launch was a success, but Astrobotic's Peregrine lander is on its last legs after a propulsion problem scuttled any hope of a soft moon landing. Speaking of moon landings, NASA gave some big updates on the Artemis program, and its lunar ambitions are also being delayed. The first astronauts won't land on the moon until at least late 2026, and a lot needs to happen between now and then. That includes having mission-ready spacesuits and a flight-worthy lander. And patience is a virtue. After months of working behind the scenes, teams at NASA's Johnson Space Center came up with a solution to finally access the bulk of an asteroid sample that returned to the Earth back in September. We'll explore the tool that finally cracked the code. Joining us for insight and analysis are Andrea Leinfelder from the Houston Chronicle and Bill Harwood from CBS News. From the Spaceflight Now News Bureau at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, this is News from the Press Site.
And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
Copies.
On board the International Space Station.
And liftoff. Go Falcon, go Dragon, go Crew 7.
This allows us to go faster and to have better technology.
When we start putting humans on that vehicle, the excitement is even going to amp up even more.
Thanks for taking the time to answer our questions. Hello and welcome to News from the Press Side. I'm Spaceflight Now reporter Will Robinson Smith. It's so good to be with you on this Friday afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. Bit of housekeeping we want to start the top of the show with. We'll have a few social breaks throughout the broadcast, so we'll be checking in on the live chat. We want to bring you into the conversation as we're talking about a lot of space news to start off a very busy 2024. So be sure to use the YouTube Super Chat feature in the live chat if you're watching live here on YouTube. And if your comment is appropriate to be read on the show or you have a question for one of our panelists, we'd love to chat about that in our social breaks. And this is our first show of the year. It's been a very busy year on the space beat. There have been 10 orbital launches that we've had already. 2 rockets made their inaugural launch just this past week. Plus, we've got a lot of Artemis program updates, a lot to discuss. And fortunately, we have a great panel of guests to break it all down. First off, we have Andrea Leinfelder. She's the space reporter for the Houston Chronicle. Been with the paper for a decade and covers both NASA and the commercial space industry. Andrea, thanks for joining us. And of course, if you've been following space news for any length of time, you more than likely know the gentleman on the far side there, Mr. Bill Harwood. He's been covering the space beat for since 1984, really. He started as the Cape Canaveral bureau chief for the United Press International, and he's now a space consultant with CBS News. Bill, great to have you with us.
Glad to be here, Will.
And so, obviously we wanted to have you both to start off a busy 2024 of space news. So we want to get started with this, with the launch of the Vulcan rocket, which began really an important milestone for ULA and potentially a very busy year for them. The United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket lifted off at 2:18 a.m. on Monday morning. As the president of ULA said, this was right down the middle, exactly what they were hoping to see from a rocket that will carry the proverbial, future of ULA on its shoulders. So, Bill, I want to start with you since you've been covering ULA since it was first created as a joint venture between Lockheed Martin and Boeing back in '05. We'll focus on the payload in just a little bit, but stepping back and looking at this launch sort of wholesale, what were your impressions of this first Vulcan flight, and how important really is this for ULA?
Well, it's interesting. I know we're going to talk about the Peregrine lunar lander that was on top of it. But I was, from the very start of this, I thought the lead really was the Vulcan, not the Peregrine. I mean, Obviously, the moon lander got most of the attention. I mean, it's the first time, we will have gone back to the moon, the United States, in more than 50 years with a lander anyway. But I think the Vulcan really was the lead. Very important, hugely critical for United Launch Alliance. They're phasing out. They got one more Delta IV Heavy left. They've got a handful, a little more than a dozen Atlas V's left, all with those Russian engines that generated so much controversy on Capitol Hill. They really need to get this rocket flying to replace, the workhorse Atlas V, and to compete with Blue Origin, the New Glenn, and of course SpaceX, the Falcon 9, the Heavy, and the Starship. So I think it was hugely important for ULA, and I think it's a shot in the arm for them that they had such an apparently smooth flight.
Yeah, it was remarkable that the count went just as smoothly as it did. Really, no hiccups to name at all that we noticed. Andrea, of course, you're based in Houston, Texas, so no surprise that you're not only covering Vulcan but also all the happenings with SpaceX. And Bill mentioned Starship. And it's an interesting point in time that we are with rocketry now, as we're getting more rockets that are starting to be fueled by a combination of methane and liquid oxygen. SpaceX obviously busy doing that with its Starship vehicle. How big of a moment is this for Methalox rockets now that Vulcan has entered the chat, as folks would say?
Yeah, so methane is definitely an up-and-coming type of propellant. And, I was talking to some experts, and one was saying that a good pro for it is just reusability. It's cleaner to refurbish the engines and fly them again. Now, obviously, Vulcan didn't refly this first one. Hopefully, in the future, we'll see them pop out the engines and fly it as they work toward reuse. But it's definitely interesting to see more and more of these companies start to switch over to methane. And this was the first one in the U.S. that was making its debut. So the engines were built by Blue Origin. And so it was actually also the first time Blue Origin had gone to orbit. So that was cool too, to see.
We talked about, just the transition of ULA from Delta IV, Atlas V, now to Vulcan, which will take over for both. Bill, as you mentioned, there's one more Delta IV Heavy flying later this year on a national security mission, potentially another national security mission for the Atlas V with the USSF 51 mission. The national security front is a big moneymaker for ULA. Going back to you, Bill, they've got potentially 2 national security missions that ULA wants to launch on Vulcan, potentially this year, according to the U.S. Space Systems Command. That's what they told us earlier this week. So given the development timeline for Vulcan, the opportunity for it to fly, and given everything else on ULA's roster this year, how probable do you think it is that we may see up to 5 Vulcans launch, or potentially 6, as Tori Bruno was suggesting?
Yeah, it's impossible to say from the outside. United Launch Alliance doesn't share a lot of technical information on their processing, how that goes. I mean, as you mentioned, Tori Bruno said that they hope to make the next flight in the April-ish time frame. I think it really depends on what the data shows from this first flight. If it was as clean as it seems to be, and they verify that with this exhaustive series of checks and telemetry reviews they're going to carry out, and if they can get one off in April and turn that one around, then maybe they have a shot at that. But it's really too soon to say. And certainly from our perspective on the outside looking in, it's impossible to have any idea how that's going to play out until it gets closer.
Yeah, wish we all had a crystal ball and could firmly see into the future. It would help our planning lives much easier.
Yeah, and Will, one thing I want to comment on something Andrea said. She pointed out, and I should have said this too, those engines were built by Blue Origin, and that's a big deal. That BE4 engine is a very big deal. Those are engines produce 550,000 pounds of thrust at sea level. They're heavy lift engines, and that was a big step forward for Blue Origin as well, because of course they're counting on putting those engines in their New Glenn rocket, which I don't know when that one's going to launch, but sometime soon, we hope. So that was another major milestone as well, those engines.
Well, and obviously Blue Origin, not saying a lot about their program, but we did see some from their program earlier this week with the rollout of their first stage booster for the New Glenn rocket. And then the CEO of Blue Origin tweeted or posted some photos on LinkedIn inside the hangar at Launch Complex 36 that showed not just the first stage booster, but also the upper stage with what looked like test BE3 engines. Andrea, how probable do you think it is, as Blue Origin suggests, that we may actually see the first flight of New Glenn? Obviously, they have to be ecstatic for the performance of the BE-4s, but still quite a ways, it seems, from the outside before their first flight.
Yeah, so I asked Blue Origin that this week, and they confirmed to me they're hoping to fly this year, but that's all I got from them was this year. So we'll definitely be watching to see when that comes online, because it's just right now is a really fun time to be covering rockets because so many new ones are coming online, right? We've got New Glenn, we've got Vulcan, we've got Starship, and then they all have these different niches and like capabilities that they have. So I'm hoping it'll be this year. It's hard to say, but it's definitely something to be fun to keep tabs on.
Well, and speaking of keeping tabs on things, we've all been closely watching the payload that was flying on board the first Vulcan flight, the principal payload, that is the Peregrine lunar lander from Pittsburgh-based Astrobotic. It seemed promising at the onset after launch. It seemed like it had a clean separation. They were able to make contacts within several minutes, and then things started to go awry. So I want to start with you, Andrea, since NASA's Johnson Space Center is one of the main main NASA installations that's over the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, where NASA is just a customer for these commercial landers. So in your reporting, as we've been watching, the Peregrine lander try to remain alive, and so far it's still, limping along there. It's got another, few dozen hours of propellant left, according to Astrobotic. How is NASA viewing, its first CLPS mission and the struggles it's facing right now?
Yeah, I mean, NASA, it was interesting going into the launch. NASA was very upfront about being like, we know landing on the moon is hard. We know the moon is littered with robotic landers that just didn't land softly, right? So success is not guaranteed. They said that right up front. Obviously, I think they expected it to be a little farther from Earth. But, a lot of their payloads have been turned on and they are getting data. So while it's not like lunar data, I think they're just happy that Peregrine has managed to turn on, keep them powered, start collecting information and data for them. To me, it's interesting to watch because every time they put out an update, the life of the Peregrine goes longer and longer and longer. I think the last one's 52 hours, which is the longest I've seen in a while. So what happened, I guess, is there was it's always the valves, isn't it? Every time, it's amazing. It's always the valves, but there's a valve that didn't seal properly, and so it caused the tank to rupture, and it was leaking propellant. And so they really had to force Peregrine to point toward the sun so that it could get the solar rays powered and get all the other systems powered. And so watching them troubleshoot, that was interesting. But I guess the leaking propellant is slowing down now. And so it'll stay longer. It's taking a slow trajectory to the moon. It was scheduled to land February 23rd. So it's a very slow path, not a direct path like Apollo. And so it's already traveled pretty far away, but it's just not near the moon. So it'll be interesting to see how much longer it kind of keeps going down this trajectory as it goes toward the moon. But I mean, I think everyone was obviously heartbroken for Astrobotic. It's hard to see, but they're glad that they've managed to keep it alive. I think 4 days now, 4 or 5. Keep it alive and keep collecting data and getting all that information. So NASA is just putting out statements along to those effects.
And it's the little Peregrine that could, Bill, right? And certainly this isn't the only CLPS mission that's on the docket for NASA this year. In fact, just next month, we're going to see Intuitive Machines take another swing at the CLPS landing record, being, now set up to be the first lander that could softly land on the moon. Given that we've had now 3 swings, 3 misses, across the world between a lander from Israel, a lander from Japan, now a lander from the United States. Bill, how likely do you think it is that 2024 will actually see the first commercial lander have a soft touchdown on the moon, given the number of attempts that are still left in the year?
Well, again, you're asking a question that's really impossible to answer because these are built by different companies with different procedures, different people. But I would assume something will get down at some point. I mean, it's almost a joke at the press site when something like this happens. Somebody will say, space is hard, and it is hard. There's no question about that. But on the other hand, they're spending a lot of money to make this happen. NASA put $108 million into this mission for the 5 instruments and the navigation sensor they were sending up. And of course, Astrobotic put its own money in. So yeah, it is definitely a challenge to land a spacecraft on another planet. Hopefully, Intuitive Machines, that's the Houston-based company that I'm sure Andrea knows more about than I do. Hopefully, they're going to get their spacecraft onto the moon. I think if a fourth one fails, it's going to raise questions in people's minds as to whether, relatively low-budget spacecraft are up to the challenge of touching down on another world. I don't know. When you look at and it's not just the commercial company. NASA's had its problems with, you look at the Mars, at the Phoenix, the original lander on Mars, that, software error, unit conversion problems, simple things that can derail an expensive mission. It's tough to do. And the more money you have, the more testing you can do to make sure you cover all those bases. So I think it's an open question. Presumably, hopefully, I'll say, Intuitive Machines pulls this off. And Astrobotic, they're coming back with the Griffin lander. Let's keep our fingers crossed that they can make that one work too. They're all great missions, but it's a challenge getting there.
And before Intuitive Machines is actually a Japanese mission. Sorry, before Intuitive Machines is a Japanese mission also targeting the moon. JAXA is trying to land on, I think last I read it was January 20th Japan time. So they're the next attempt.
Oh yeah, I was focusing mine on commercial missions, but yeah, you're absolutely right. They're going to face the same challenge the commercial folks have faced, no question about it.
Yeah, and they'll be live streaming that, I believe. So we'll be waiting with bated breath in a week to see if they're able to, make that pocket shot. Andrea, Bill brought up Intuitive Machines. They are, situated in your backyard. I'm sure you've had the chance to talk to them. Well, I know you've had the chance to talk to them a few times. How are they feeling now that from a U.S. perspective, the spotlight is now turned to them?
So, it's interesting because I've been following them a lot. And so, they're supposed to launch in November. They're supposed to launch in January. So they've always been telling me, we want to be the first U.S. company to land on the moon. We want to be the first one to return America to the moon in more than 50 years. And so even on Friday, before Astrobotic launched atop Vulcan, they sent out a statement to me being like, we are going to launch in mid-February at an undetermined date, but we will land by February 22nd, right? Like they were still pushing to be like one day ahead of Astrobotic. So there's a bit of I'm sure it's very friendly, healthy competition, but there's a bit of rivalry there. So, I haven't talked to them directly since the Astrobotic, anomaly, but I'm sure they're like a little bit eager to get to their chance, a little bit nervous. I'm sure they have all those emotions. I was talking to Tim Crane, who's one of the co-founders. He's like, you can do all the physics, you can do all the science, you can know that it's going to work, and then you put it in the real world environment, right? And it's like, that's the real test if it works. So that's kind of where they're at.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we will be sure to keep a close eye on Intuitive Machines, and of course Astrobotic when they come back with their Griffin lander next, and Slim from JAXA. Lots going on with the moon. And our next topic coming up, we're going to be talking about some shakeups for NASA's journey to the moon through the Artemis program. But real quick, want to take a pause for a moment from the conversation, just take a quick peek at our social chat here. Want to thank everyone for coming in and joining us for our first News from the Press site of 2024. Just want a reminder, if you'd like to have your question read on the show, or if you have a comment for one of our guests, be sure to just use the YouTube Super Chat feature. I'd love to bring in your comments and queries. So we've got a lot to talk about. Do want to thank Arthur Zernis Jr. for joining us with channel membership, though, at the PAD leader level. And as a reminder, our channel members have a number of benefits that come along with that, including access to 4K live views of all of the launches from the Cape that we have here on Spaceflight Now, as well as discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com, and member-only videos. So we'll be keeping tabs on the live chat as we continue to go along. But want to go ahead and jump back into the conversation because we have quite a bit to talk about now with the Artemis program coming up, and some unfortunate delays. Depending on how you look at it, unfortunate, but potentially very necessary. So we have sort of the send up to this from NASA Administrator Bill Nelson from a conversation about the Artemis shakeup that we had. Let's listen into the NASA Administrator, and we'll be back on the other side.
As we remind everybody at every turn, safety is our top priority. And to give Artemis teams more time to work through the challenges with first-time developments, operations, and integration. We're going to give more time on Artemis 2. So what I want to tell you is we are adjusting our schedule to target Artemis 2 for September of 2025 and September of 2026 for Artemis 3, which will send humans for the first time to the lunar South Pole.
And again, that was the voice of NASA Administrator Bill Nelson talking about yet another delay to the Artemis program, this time for, as you heard him at the end, Artemis missions 2 and 3, each delaying by about 10 months, close to a year. Andrea, we'll start with you in this part of the conversation. The Government Accountability Office gave us sort of a glimpse at the probabilities of another delay with the Artemis program at the end of last year. Heading into the announcement earlier this week, were you expecting the delay to be as long as was stated? And what was kind of your biggest takeaway overall from the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely expecting a delay. You know, they put out the news announcement on Friday being like, okay, we have a big meeting coming up with Artemis. And I'm like, oh, this is the delay, right? Like, I think everyone in the industry is acknowledging that their deadlines are optimistic, you know, and I appreciate that they give themselves hard deadlines because, you know, I think it kind of lights a fire under your butt to keep you moving faster. But, you know, it is definitely, we knew 2025 wasn't going to happen for landing people on the moon. So I expected it. You know, I don't know how much of a delay I expected. I'm not sure if I expected Artemis 2 to be delayed as much as Artemis 3 for sure, just because Artemis 3 has so much hardware that still needs to be built. But, you know, my overall takeaway is just that we all kind of were expecting it. And it's kind of like the space is hard quote, we're going to fly when we're ready, right? They say that a lot, which is definitely you want them to be safe when it comes to flying astronauts. So that's what we all want. But definitely, like, you know, it sounded like they were going to work on the heat shield some more. They're still testing. The heat shield has material that's meant to char, but some of the charred material came off during Artemis 1. And so they're still testing why that happened and why it wasn't in their models. And they're still kind of, I think the root cause is hopefully coming out soon. And then obviously there's just like the hardware that needs to be built to land people on the moon, to walk on the moon. There's still a lot to build. So, you know, I think we'll all be eagerly watching as they continue doing these tests and they continue building and developing hardware. But it was definitely an expected delay.
Yeah, and Bill, you've said before on CBS News that you thought a slip for Artemis 3 to potentially 2027 wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. I'll not ask you to look in your crystal ball just yet, but you know, Andrea mentioned that there's still an open, you know, question about some of the charring on the heat shield from the Artemis 1 Orion capsule. One of the things that jumped out at me, and I'm guessing may have jumped out at you as well from Tuesday's conversation about the Artemis program, was as they were working through the crew capsule for the Artemis 3 Orion, they found some concerning issues with some of the hardware that were connected to the life support systems, and namely the carbon dioxide scrubber, which made them, you know, have to go back and change the timeline for the Artemis 2 mission. How concerning was it that those issues are just now coming up?
You know, the battery issue and the life support system that you're talking about, that's just one of those things. I mean, that can happen on any flight sequence. And I think in this case, it's going to give them the umbrella to deal with the heat shield problem, as Andrea mentioned, because that to me is a really big deal, that it doesn't work the way the model suggests. You know, Wayne Hale, who's the former, you know, veteran Space Shuttle Ascent Entry Flight Director, program manager, he started out as an aerodynamicist. And his blog the other day raised real questions about pressing ahead with a heat shield that's not acting the way it is supposed to or the way you expect it to. So presumably the delay that's going to be required to fix this battery issue will give them the time they need to get to the bottom of the heat shield charring that Andrea mentioned, because they've got to figure that out and resolve it. When guys like Wayne Hale are waving flags in public about that, you have to take it seriously. But you know, to me, I think they'll be lucky to make 2026 at best, and I think, you know, the things that we you know, the elephant in the room, of course, is the SpaceX human landing system. They have got to launch the Super Heavy Starship multiple times. Jessica Jensen, you know, SpaceX vice president, was saying it's going to take like 10 tanker flights of the super heavy tanker, I'll call it, just to get the gas in low Earth orbit to fuel up the human landing system to go to the moon. So, you know, when you think back on the 2 test flights we've had of that gargantuan rocket down in Boca Chica, think about seeing that fly. You know, when you throw in other test flights to make sure this is really all going to have the reliability NASA's going to require before they put crews on top, or to go down to the surface of the moon, I should say. We're talking a lot of flights between now and 2026, and they're going to have to go well. You know, you can't have a big setback in the middle of all that, you know, because you're going to have a small database to start with. So I think it's going to be a real challenge to make 2026. You know, the other wild card in all of this is government funding. You know, on February the 2nd, you know, when they resolved the funding problem back in, I guess it was December, they broke it up into 2 pieces. But the part that will affect NASA and that agency is going to come up for a vote on February the 2nd. If we get a continuing resolution, you know, that freezes funding at last year's levels, that's going to play a role too. So this is an enormously complex puzzle that NASA's got to figure out in the months ahead, and it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I know there's a committee meeting with the House Committee on Science and Technology that's happening this coming week, and obviously cost and schedule is top of mind for lawmakers there. But Bill, you bring up a good point that, you know, they're going to have questions about, you know, the ballooning costs, but also, you know, staying on schedule and time, and be very curious to see how it all plays out. But
let me just want to jump back and say one thing. I'm sure Andrea would agree with this. You know, I'm raising questions about whether SpaceX can have it ready or not. You know, I've been here a long time, and I never thought I'd see rockets landing at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. I mean, that took me off guard, you know, and so and now they're so routine, I hardly even mention it in my stories. So I'm not saying SpaceX can't do this. If anybody can do it, SpaceX can. They clearly have the expertise. They have the software. They understand getting rockets back, although the scale of the Super Heavy is a different ball game. But I don't doubt they could do it. I'm just saying I'm not sure they can do it in time to meet the schedule NASA laid out the other day.
Driven, of course, by the regulatory side, I imagine, since, you know, every time they fly and they don't have a completely successful profile, the FAA has to come in, reevaluate, and then set up another launch attempt, you know, another launch license for them, which, Andrea, we're waiting for IFT3, or the Integrated Flight Test number 3, to not use acronyms overly. You know, SpaceX sounded optimistic, as Bill alluded to, comments from Jessica Jensen during the presser that mission could happen next month. You know, given the iterative process that we've seen with Starship, and, you know, as Bill was fortunately able to get an answer from Jessica with, you know, a little bit of prodding from Bill Nelson, you know, what do you think that the timeline will be to really get those, you know, 10 back-to-back flights? Are, you know, obviously we have to have a fully working Starship first.
Oh yeah. You know, I can't even start to speculate on the timeline. I mean, the Falcon 9 already launches with a cadence that's insane, right? So like SpaceX is pretty good at like fast turnarounds. And obviously I think they would probably split the launches from the Cape and from South Texas. So there's still, you know, there's still some issues in South Texas with whether, you know, some of the locals aren't really loving the rocket launches down there, or how frequent they are, the environmental impact, right? So, you know, there's still more pushback there than there is from the Cape. But like Bill was saying, we really, you know, SpaceX can do this, but first we just need to get to the stage where they stop blowing up their rockets, right? Like, you're going to put people on this thing. And we're still kind of a ways from like getting through one not even orbital lap of the Earth, right? So we've got a ways to see all this. It will be crazy when you start seeing them launch back to back to back to get 10 up there, and then, you know, to transfer the super cold propellant in space. You know, it's a lot of milestones. And, you know, SpaceX talks a lot about how they haven't moved like the super cold propellant part, but they've done docking. So they're getting 2 starships to meet up in space won't be hard. They dock to the space station all the time. So like, you know, they keep talking about how they have most of these technologies down. We just have to kind of put them all together. So I have no idea, like, the time frame. I don't know, Bill, what do you think? Like, if they were to launch 10 starships to refuel, like, could they do that in a month and then get the HLS up there? Like, longer? I have no idea.
It's a good point, and I have no idea, and that's partly because SpaceX tells us next to nothing about their progress and how they process these vehicles, how they resolve problems. They don't tell us what the problems are or how they get resolved. Now, they'll tell us at the end, like when the FAA has a list of things that SpaceX has to do before they can fly again or get a license. They'll tell us how they addressed it, but we don't hear that in real time, and we don't hear the day-to-day kind of thing. So it makes it virtually impossible to have an educated even guess about when they can do this or how long it might take. It's you got me.
Well, and to that point, Bill, from a space reporter standpoint for the three of us up here, obviously, part of our job is to keep the public informed about the timeline of these things, not just because people are interested in watching the launches and seeing the missions go by, but also because it's a matter of public safety and, folks need to be informed of, when these launches go, what's involved with them, how it may be impacting everyone. Given your long career in covering, shuttle into now the commercial era, how different/difficult is it to, really do that part of our job and keeping the public informed when we're in an era when so much of the critical pieces of this architecture, are behind commercial walls and, you don't have, SpaceX, for example, needing to say as much as NASA used to.
Yeah, it's night and day. I mean, it really is night and day across the board. NASA's charter, when the agency was founded back in 1958, required an open agency to tell the public what they were doing, why they were doing it, how much it would cost, et cetera, et cetera. That is completely different in this age of commercial spaceflight, and that's understandable to an extent. Companies have a right to protect proprietary technological innovation on their part. I mean, that's totally understandable. No one expects to, get the inner workings of one of these complex systems. But I think when you're talking about missions that are funded by the taxpayer, which in this case is, the cargo dragons, crew dragons, the human landing system, I think there is a requirement for more transparency and information. Now, NASA's answer to that is that their management is totally plugged in. SpaceX keeps them informed of what's going on. But at the end of the day, that comes down to NASA saying, trust us. Okay. I mean, that's what it is. We have no direct knowledge on the outside world of the things they're telling us. So we have to take their word for it. And, as a veteran of Challenger and Columbia and investigations like that in the past, I don't know that that's a good thing to do, but that's the situation we're in. And complicating that is the politics of arms export control laws, which prevent companies from sharing any technical information that an adversary could possibly use, in a high-tech defense system or weapon system. And so, when you're talking rocket engines and propellants and pressures and turbines and all the things that make these rockets work, they don't want to share any of that for fear of running afoul of the export control laws that are now in place, and they are very, very strict. So the combination of those two things, the proprietary nature of the technology and the political, the forbidding companies to share information that could be in any way that could be used by an adversary, really makes it difficult to cover what's going on. And, there's not one single thing you can point to. It all adds up. But the short answer to your question, from the days when it was all NASA to today, night and day. I am more in the dark today than I've ever been. And I don't think that's going to change.
Can I add something? I
Please.
do want to give kudos to Astrobotic because they have had so many updates on their lander right now. And so that's been refreshing to see a company be like, here's what we know, here's what we know, here's what we know.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree with you more. It was really striking. What a great job they did telling an unfortunate story, but they did a great job of it.
Yeah.
And persistently telling that story, even to today.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And before we wrap up the conversation about the Artemis program, and we've talked about the spacecraft, the lander, obviously a big, long pole in the tent that doesn't quite get as much attention, seems, as the flashiness of Starship, but as the spacesuits themselves, which, of course, Andrea, you've got Axiom Space in your backyard that's working on those for Artemis 3. Collins Aerospace has also been contracted for future lunar EVA suits, but we did get a chance of thing. We've got the video here of them sharing some photos of the bending test. There we go. that were just recently released. So we're getting another glimpse at the white versions of these suits that will ultimately be closer to the ones that will actually be used on the moon, not the sort of demonstration black and orange and blue ones. Andrea, in your conversations with Axiom about the spacesuits, obviously they've got, a crewed mission coming up next week, but on the spacesuits front, how are they feeling about their developments at this point in time and their readiness for Artemis 3 now at this later date?
I'm going to be honest, I haven't touched base with them since one of their last media events. Hey, come see our spacesuit. So I just know that's a crucial piece of the developments being built here in Houston. But I don't know their timeline, or every time I've talked to them, the spacesuit people have always been like, we're not going to be the reason we don't make 2025, right? But I don't really have any updates from there. I'm sorry.
It's interesting, Will, though, and Andrea, when you think about it, the spacesuits are something that never occurred to me would be an impediment to going back to the moon. You think about the Apollo guys, more than 50 years ago are walking around on the moon, and you would think that a spacesuit would be something that would be relatively, in quote marks, easy to upgrade and build, but obviously not. These are miniature spacecraft themselves that are going to have to work in that dusty environment on the moon, and it's obviously a challenge. But I've just been struck by that one. That seems like something that they know how to do, and I'm surprised that it's been as difficult as it's been.
Well, they knew how to do it, but they haven't made it comfortable. It's a big problem, I think.
Understood. Yeah, understood.
Yeah. So I know NASA spent a long time trying to revamp its design and pass that information on the commercial companies to build on, just so that we don't have small astronauts disqualified, because a lot of small astronauts couldn't do spacewalks on the station because they're just not fitting into the suits. And so it's a lot of I think fit issues and comfort, especially on the moon. You want them to actually be able to bend over and pick up rocks, not have to do that Apollo bunny hop fall over type of thing. So I could see it being complex. Like you called them, that's my favorite thing to call them, is little mini spacecraft, people-sized spacecraft. I definitely gets less attention though.
It's funny. I remember when I was a kid growing up, the National Geographic this is back in the 60s and early 70s. I hate to say how old I am, but they had these crazy ideas for spacesuits, like these can-like things with domes on top. That this is how we'll explore the moon. And it's kind of funny looking at it today.
Well, and Stephen, if we can bring back up the B-roll on the Axiom suits, just to get another look at the mobility exercises that they're doing with those. To Andrea's point, just of having really the extra flexibility, not just in their joints and the size of the astronauts that can perform duties in them. Yeah, they're scooping. It's a little hard to tell exactly what material this is. Sort of looks like wood chips almost. But just to have the ability to bend and flex, and not only that, but also make sure that the suits are able to safely and correctly interact with the various types of landers that are coming down. And the new Orion spacecraft obviously is something that's a little bit different than last time, and just make sure that all of that interplay is working. I know the director of the Human Landing System program says that's something that she and her office are making sure that there's coordination between all of the players, that everyone's toys are working together, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving right along, want to talk about the week that was in launches. As I mentioned at the top of the show, it's been a busy week in commercial spaceflight, as well as for some of the nation states around the world, really since January 1st. So what we're going to do is just take a quick rundown of all the launches that we've had, 10 of them so far. And then on the other side, we'll bring our panelists back in, Andrea and Bill, to talk about any ones that may have jumped out at them. So just as a brief rundown to jog everyone's memory, of course, the year started off in India with the launch of the PSLV-DL rocket with 2 solid rocket boosters. That was on January 1st, launching an X-ray observatory spacecraft called the X-ray Perimeter satellite, and also had 10 additional payloads in the POEM spacecraft. That was followed here at Vandenberg Space Force Base, I should say, the Starlink 7-9 mission, sending up a batch of Starlink satellites, but importantly with that one, it included the first 6 direct-to-cell capable Starlinks. And earlier this week, SpaceX offered some photos of 2 phones that they said were using the T-Mobile network to exchange some text between the 2 phones on that service, so demonstrating the capabilities of that. Moving along, on January 3rd, SpaceX launched the Ovzon 3 satellite from here at the Cape. And on Wednesday of this week, actually, Redwire Space confirmed that its solar arrays that it provided for the spacecraft, some of the ROSAs, similar to the iROSAs that are on the space station, they were able to deploy. And this is the first time they've actually included ROSA solar panels on a commercial spacecraft that was built by Maxar Space Systems. Moving on to January 5th, we saw the first launch of the year from China. The Kuaizhou 1A rocket launched, sending up 4 Tianmu satellites to low Earth orbit. Then coming into this week, we had on January 7th, another SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket launched here from the Cape. That was the Starlink 6-35 mission, sending up 23 Starlinks to low Earth orbit. Followed up by, of course, one of the launches that we've talked a lot about, the launch of Vulcan's or the launch of ULA's Vulcan rocket, I should say, heading off at 1718 UTC or 218 here on the East Coast on that very important first certification mission. Moving on, January 9th, another launch from China where they sent up a Long March 2C rocket carrying another X-ray astronomy payload on that rocket, known as the Einstein payload. It was a collaboration between the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the European Space Agency, and the German Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics. It was followed up on January 11th by the 3rd and final launch so far from China. This was another Kuaizhou 1A rocket that lifted off at 0352 UTC, sending up the Tianjin 102 satellite, described as a space environment detection satellite. Later that day, another big debut for the Chinese company OrienSpace, which launched the debut of a barge-based rocket called Gravity 1, featuring a lot of solid rocket boosters strapped around it, launched from that barge on the Yellow Sea with some pretty spectacular sights from drone angles. And then last but not least, we had the launch of a rocket from Japan. That was the H2A-202 rocket from the Tanegashima Space Center in Japan. Hopefully I didn't butcher that too heavily. And on board was it was a reconnaissance satellite, the Intelligence Gathering Satellite, or IGS Optical 8. And that launched just this morning at 0444 UTC. So a lot to have gone through. Andrea and Bill, want to bring you back in. It's been a busy year so far in spaceflight, 10 orbital missions and counting. Of course, we've got a couple from SpaceX potentially this weekend if the weather holds. From the long list that I just ran through, though, were there any missions that jumped out at you? And what kind of stood out to you from this past couple of weeks in orbital space flight? And Bill, I'll start with you.
The pace. The pace of all these rocket launches. The Chinese are really amping up their launch schedule. SpaceX has talked about in public hearings or news conferences launching up to more than 140 flights this year, not counting those Starship Super Heavy test flights. It's interesting. It used to be weeks would go by between launches, and now we're talking days and in some cases hours. And so that's impressive. Not any one payload so much. I mean, the Vulcan was the big one for me in terms of the mission with the most impact on the U.S. launch industry. But the sheer pace of these things is astonishing.
And Andrea, what about for you?
Yeah, Vulcan definitely took most of my time as the big one for the U.S. But it's just interesting to see the pace of China, I think, because, China is it's quickly becoming a space power. I mean, it's already there, but it's just the pace at which it's launching. It has a mission later this year to send a robotic lander to the far side of the moon and collect a sample, right? It's just, and obviously every time you get NASA Administrator Bill Nelson on the topic of China, he's worried about a space race. And so it's just, I think it's really interesting to keep tabs on the developments that are happening over there.
Yeah, it's almost been like a case of the tortoise and the hare, because China's had a very slow and steady pace. They have laid out what they're going to do, and they're doing it step by step. In the U.S., of course, every time a new administration comes in, people have to reinvent the wheel. So in some sense, we go back 2 steps for every step that the country goes forward in that regard. But they are a major player. I would argue they are absolutely up there. I think they've eclipsed Russia as perhaps the second most important or most significant player on the space stage, still after the U.S., but they're catching up fast, no question.
Yeah, and just seeing how fast, not only a number of commercial rocket companies have come up in China, but also the pace of their human spaceflight program, Bill.
And science. They're launching. They've got a Hubble class or bigger space telescope coming up that's going to really be something.
Yeah, and obviously bringing a lot of international partners along with them, as the U.S. is trying to do with the Artemis Accords. So it's really sort of a jockeying to see sort of how much of the world each of these two space superpowers can bring along with them.
Yeah, no question about it. And in the case of we've forgotten to mention their space station right now. There's people up there. It's a very sophisticated, state-of-the-art station. One of the things about the ISS that NASA's going to retire probably around 2030. There's modules on the station that were, built in the 90s. It is an aging outpost, no question about it. And as great as it's been, that China is right on that stage too. So I think it's interesting to see. And the other interesting thing about all this, I'm sure Andrea would agree, the U.S. is forbidden by law from doing anything with China in the space arena. And you were mentioning bringing people along. The more the merrier, the way I look at it. But obviously the political world doesn't see it that way. And I realize there are threats there, but just pointing it out, they are major players that we're not even allowed to hardly talk to. And so that's an interesting divide between us.
Yeah, and as I talk to people, it's kind of like a race to the moon to create the norms, right? Because like China, like you said, is getting all these countries on its side, and the U.S. is the Artemis Accords, and we're like 30 plus now, right? I can't keep track. And so it's like whoever kind of gets there first can be like, yes, we have all these people who agree to our rules for how we'll work on the moon. And so it'll be interesting to see how, like you said, instead of everyone kind of working together, we've got these couple different camps going up there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and we were talking about, not just new players on the scene, joining China and the U.S., but also very much in their own right, India becoming a powerhouse on the space front. I mean, last year they successfully landed on the moon, something that, is going to be a much talked about, item of discussion this year for countries around the world. They sent a spacecraft on a solar mission. They launched the first spacecraft of the year so far. Talk to me about, India's space program, guys. I mean, this is, something that, I think, Bill, like you were saying, has been coming along sort of, by the plan that they designed. And, we're really starting to see fruits of their labor really blossoming now.
Well, I'm no expert on the Indian space program. It's all I can do to keep up with what's going on right here at the Kennedy Space Center. But it's impressive, They are building interplanetary spacecraft. They are building low Earth orbit spacecraft and apparently doing it very well. And they have a family of rockets now that I think is going to be very competitive down the road. The more they launch, of course, the better that's going to get. So I think they're serious players. I mean, they're obviously, one of the four space superpowers, if you will, after, the U.S., China, and Russia. And I think they desire to move right on up that ladder.
Yeah, and Andrea, obviously they've got a mission launching later this year with NISAR, a combination of JPL and ISRO over in India. So, I mean, the U.S.-India partnership is also there, and I think something that Administrator Nelson was, or still is, keen to capitalize on, as evidenced by his recent trip, right?
Yeah, kind of like Bill, I've not been following the Indian space program too closely. I know obviously last year they landed on the moon successfully, and that like kind of put them in this whole new category. They also proved that they could do it on more of a budget than the U.S. has when it throws at its space programs. But other powers I just wanted to bring up was United Arab Emirates is now going to build an airlock for Gateway, and so like it's interesting to see all these different components coming out of these countries, but. India's just their space program is definitely growing.
And we're closing on the end of our hour together. But before we go, obviously, you both are very busy on the Space Beat work on your own individual stories. So wanted to touch on a couple that you've been reporting out over the last week or so, and then kind of look ahead to what you've got, in your notebook and keeping your eye on for next week. So Andrea, starting with you here. Obviously, one of NASA's accomplishments of the week that it has been working at behind the scenes is trying to get open the majority of an asteroid sample that was brought back in September, and they've been trying to crack that nut ever since, so to speak. Talk about this new tool that they developed to finally get the TAGSAM open and, get to the majority of the treasure trove that is asteroid Bennu.
Yeah, so they went the spacecraft overall traveled 3.9 billion miles to Bennu and back. And so everyone was so excited when it landed and it had all this material. And then two of the fasteners, essentially bolts, would not budge. And as like a non-scientist, you're going, come on, how hard is it? Can't you just get the bolt out? But you're NASA, for God's sake, you're rocket scientists. But I was talking to them all, and I was talking to a lot of them before this mission, before this week's announcements that they got it. And it's just like, no, you have to be patient because we traveled 3.9 billion miles and we don't want to contaminate it with like a hammer and a drill. So like they had to go and they had to build tools that would not react with the environment in there, because you don't want to be like looking through the Bennu samples being like, this seems like it came from an Earth tool. And, they have this Mylar flap that they had to get open. They want to make sure they didn't damage that and sprinkle Mylar in the sample. So they had to be really careful to build these tools so that they could get the sample out and not contaminate it. And, NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston it's where the moon rocks first came back. And so it's kind of become this hub for when we bring stuff back from space. They have all these cabinets that are filled with nitrogen because nitrogen doesn't react with materials. And so instead of having like Earth's humidity that could corrode it, Houston's humidity that could corrode things, they pump all these cabinets with nitrogen. And then they have like their arms in these gloves. And so, you talk to these curators, it's like tedious. Their arms are up here, it's very slow movements, and it gets hot in there. And so it's been a very slow process, but they finally opened it. And so I'm excited to see, like, before they opened, their bare minimum goal was to bring back 60 grams. Before they opened it, they collected 70 grams from outside of the main like container, the TAGSAM, but also by like scooping some out. They couldn't have two bolts open, but they could manage to scoop some out of the container from like the top. And so they had gotten 70 grams. So it's like, okay, if nothing else, we meet our bare minimum goal. So everyone was pretty content with that. And some of the science had already begun. But now I'm just curious, like, how much did we get? Because I remember when it tagged the asteroid, they were like, this thing is full. We didn't expect it to be so full. Like, there's a rock propping it open, material was escaping its face. It was crammed full. So I'm curious how much they got. So it was awesome news to see this week that they've got it open, and we're going to get hopefully a wait not too long now.
Well, and pivoting from stuff coming back to Earth from far beyond to sending stuff up from Earth to outer space. Bill, obviously, you always have your eyes on the goings and comings from the International Space Station. As we alluded to earlier in the conversation, Axiom Space getting ready to send up its next private astronaut mission, but you've also been tracking the comings and goings of NASA astronauts as well as Russian cosmonauts. Give us a little overview of the next couple of months on station, because it's going to be busy.
Yeah, it is. These crews go up on 6-month centers, so usually in the February-March timeframe, and then again in roughly September. In the fall, you have these crew rotation missions coming up. One thing that makes this one interesting, on February the 4th, Oleg Kononenko on board the space station right now is going to surpass Gennady Padalka's all-time record for cumulative time in space. I'm looking at my notes. Padalka, over 5 flights, logged 878 days in space. When Kononenko took off back in September, his mark stood at 736 days over 4 flights, but he's going to surpass that record. And he's going to stay up for a year this time. That's what people, I think, forget. So he and Nikolai Chub and Laurel O'Hara were launched last September to the space station. O'Hara is going to come down in March and being replaced by Tracy Dyson, who's going up on what amounts to a Soyuz taxi flight with Oleg Novitsky. Let me see if I can pronounce this right. And a Belarusian astronaut, Marina Vasilevskaya, who's going to spend a week on board. And then Novitsky and Vasilevskaya will come down with Laurel O'Hara and leave Tracy Dyson up there with Kononenko and Chub. They'll come home in September. So a year-long flight for Chub and Kononenko, which is, another milestone in terms of space station mission durations, and really quite interesting. And of course, in the middle of all that, toward the end of the month of February, if the Intuitive Moonlander takes off on time on February 14th, then Crew 8 will take off on a SpaceX Crew Dragon around the end of that month. to replace the Crew 7 crew that's up there now. So it's always a complex musical chairs sort of thing that goes on here as these crews swap out. But this one's just got a little bit of extra interest because of what's going on with having someone from Belarus on board, which is a strong country that strongly supports Vladimir Putin and Russia's war in Ukraine, and then Chronicle and Chub staying up for the full year. So an interesting several weeks coming up here for sure.
And just to highlight what we were seeing on screen, that was Historic Launch Complex 39A, of course, where all the crew missions will launch from, as far as the SpaceX missions go, from here at the Cape. And,
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And here's the countdown clock with the very next crew that's going to be launching, the quartet of the AX-3 mission led by former NASA astronaut Michael Lopez Alegria, leading this, being advertised as an all-European space flight. Of course, Commander Mike L.A. has dual citizenship between the United States and Spain. And Bill, you actually had a really good little back and forth with him during the AX-3 presser yesterday, I believe it was, just about, his willingness and wanting to keep, going with these missions as long as Axiom will have him. Can you just give us a brief recap of that?
Well, yeah, no, I just was pointing out the guy's flown in space, multiple times, and training for a space flight is not trivial. It's very exhausting. There's a lot of travel involved, a lot of learning of these science and procedures. And of course, as the commander, he's responsible for getting his crewmates up to speed on all the station systems. And I mean, that takes a lot out of people, I would think. But he said, no, man, he said he'll have his hand up as long as they'll take him. So that'll be interesting. See how many more flights. Right now, Axiom has 2 veteran commanders. Peggy Whitson, of course, the very well-known former NASA space station commander, and Mike Lopez Alegria. But again, one of the most experienced astronauts who worked for NASA and now is the vice president at Axiom. So at some point, he said they're going to bring on another commander or 2 down the road. But for now, it looks like Whitson and Mike L.A. are going to be rotating in that seat for as long as is reasonable. Put it that way.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much longer he is willing and wanting to actually make those space flights. And speaking of people's times wrapping up, we're at the close of our hour, so we'll go ahead and close with this, going back around the horn, starting with Bill, and I'll give Andrea the last word. What do you have your eye on for this next week, and where can people follow your work?
Well, the stuff I write, besides tweeting things, I should say, or Xing them, or whatever you're supposed to call that these days, CBSnews.com. There's a SciTech section, and depending on the significance of the story, it'll either be out front or it'll be in the science and technology section. What am I looking forward to? I am gearing up for the AX-3 mission from Axiom. We do a lot of background on those missions whenever there's people on board, and then transitioning to Intuitive, the moon landing, because I think given what happened to Peregrine, that's going to take on some added significance this time around. And then, of course, Crew 8 and the Russian crew rotation. So it's going to be a busy couple of weeks, no question.
And Andrea?
Yeah, I've pretty much got the same lineup. AX-3, it's a Houston company. All the astronauts trade in Houston, so that's our big one. Next one coming up. And then after that, obviously, I've been keeping tabs of Intuitive Machines, so we're eager to see them launch as well. But yeah, and you can follow my work at HoustonChronicle.com and on X and Threads and Fourth and LinkedIn. But mostly if it's social, I'm there.
Yeah, I'm too old to even know what some of those are, so I'm at a disadvantage here.
Well, I will let you both go in just a moment. Just at the buzzer beater, we did get a question in from one of our channel members that I would love for the 2 of you to answer before we wrap things up. Callistia Lee asks, highlighted a question from Tom Marble asking, how do y'all respond to people who don't understand why we are exploring space? She's paraphrasing, but curious about your answers. So there's a lot of different directions that we could all take that, but I'll leave the final word to the 2 of you. Why are we exploring space? Why is this whole enterprise important?
Andrea?
I tend to tailor that answer to who I'm talking to be honest. For some people, the best answer is when we go to space, we learn things that can benefit life on Earth. So, you get new technologies that can improve our life on Earth, improve our health on Earth, improve our crops, satellites can improve life on Earth by monitoring crops, monitoring climate change, monitoring all this stuff. So, one reason to explore space is to keep making life better here on Earth. Another reason is just for the sake of exploration, right? Like, what's out there? Where did we come from? How did Earth get here? How did Earth get developed? We want to learn more and we want to push the boundaries, and humans have always wanted to explore. So it's just kind of next exploration. And the third one, my personal one, like, it would be just so much fun. Like, I'm waiting for the day when hopefully I could get on some level of affordability to get into some level of space, right? Just because I can't only imagine how much fun it would be to be on one of those missions. And so, there are tons of other reasons to explore space. There's science, there's STEM, there's encouraging. I know a lot of countries use their space programs to encourage more kids to study the science, technology, engineering, and math. And so, you can bring up a whole nother class of engineers and stuff. And so there's just a ton of different reasons. I like to tailor that to the person I'm talking to usually.
What she said. No, I'll say this. I would just break it down. You really have to know, are you talking about human space exploration or are you talking about robotic space exploration? And what Andrea said about all the satellites and the science probes that feed back these enormous volumes of knowledge to us, that's self-explanatory. And if you don't believe that's worth doing, then we can't really have that discussion. The human side of it is debatable. When you look at Mars, you look at the moon, you think about the technology required to get ice off the moon, to deep space exploration is so far beyond the level of technology that exists today, and the cost associated with that, that's a debatable point. But as Carl Sagan, maybe apocryphally, or someone like him once said, no Buck Rogers, no bucks. And so if you take people out of that equation, it's not clear the public would support an ambitious space program. So I think they're wedded. I have mixed feelings about it after all these years of covering it, just because of the way it's carried out primarily. But at the end of the day, not a dime is spent in space. It's all spent right here. And it maintains the most experienced and sophisticated aerospace workforce on the planet. And that is a good thing for the United States of America, really for anybody. But that's worth doing, in my opinion. What we do as we proceed with that is a debatable point.
And for my bit of this, I will say it's worth it just for conversations like we've had today. So Andrea Leinfelder, Bill Harwood, thank you both so much for taking some time on a Friday afternoon to chat with me, and look forward to having you back on the show and reading more of your work as it comes out.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And yes, just little technical snafu on the way out there, but want to thank the folks behind Spaceflight Now that made this show possible. First off, our wonderful moderators in the live chat for helping keep the conversations going. Our thanks to Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane, our wonderful launch photographers. You'll see them back in action over the weekend. Our editor, Stephen Young, who's running the technical aspects of the show and keeping the ship shape and moving forward here at spaceflightnow.com, as well as on our YouTube channel. Most of all, I want to thank you for taking part of your day to be with us, learn a little bit more about what's happening on the Space Beat. And of course, we'll be back with you next Friday for our next News from the Press site. So for all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. A lot of launches, a lot more adventures to come. We'll see you next time at Astra.